Hey there, my name is Raisa Knott, and this is the final presentation video that is going to accompany my paper. So for my final project, I chose to research two different mental health disorders that are prevalent in adolescents and young adults today, and those are social anxiety disorder and major depressive disorder or clinical depression. Anxiety and depression are two huge mental health disorders that are commonly regarded in discourse, and especially in psychology and clinical research as well. So there's a lot of focus on anxiety and depression in adult years, but it really isn't highly regarded when it comes to young adults and teenagers and adolescents. And so that's kind of why I decided to focus in on that. Specifically because, as we know, different life stages and different stages of development and growth kind of experience things differently. So the way that I may experience depression or anxiety as an adult could differ greatly from that a 15 or 14-year-old may experience it. And the reasons and the major influences that factor into why they experience that are definitely different as well. So, as a future RN and as a current EMT and a current volleyball coach to 13 and 14-year-olds, this is something that is very important to me. And I think that should be taken just as serious as physical health disorders and conditions. You know, things that are mental or emotionally motivated, like anxiety and depression, are easy to overlook. And they're also really easy to disregard. But they are very, very important. So let's get into it. I have a couple of notes in front of me. I'm not reading off of my paper, but I am kind of using my final project outline so that I don't miss any steps. So anxiety disorder is characterized by intense feelings of just fear and worry. And that's essentially what it is. So people who suffer from social anxiety disorder have a lot of trouble interacting with others. It's honestly a challenge. It's difficult for them to interact with others because of this constant feeling of worry and this constant persistent feeling of fear. They have intense and very sudden and uncontrollable feelings of anxiety and terror that makes it really difficult for them to function in everyday life, especially in very extreme cases. Depression is similar, and it's also interrelated. It's often interrelated with anxiety. Depression is just, I would just say it's just a huge and intense and overwhelming feeling of sadness and hopelessness. And so normally humans get sad. That's a normal human emotion. But those who suffer from depression have chronic and long-term and very severe feelings of depression, of sadness, that really shapes their behaviors and the way that they live their life, and it limits and inhibits the way that they live their life and interact with others and things like that. Okay, so as with any disorder or as with any mental health concern, there are going to be biological, cognitive, and socio-emotional influences that tie into why an individual is experiencing that. And so that's kind of what I'm going to go over today. So biologically, in adolescence, one major biological factor that ties into mental health disorders is puberty. We know during adolescence, puberty is like a hallmark characteristic of adolescency. When we're in high school, that's like the major thing that's going on with us, but many people don't realize that puberty is highly biological and uncontrollable. So there is a neuroendocrine kind of system and junction that goes around in our brain that kind of ties in our gonads and our important organs with our central nervous system. And this endocrine system is responsible for relaying hormones. And hormones are crazy, and hormones cause us to act a way. As an adult, hormones cause me to act and behave a certain way. So I can only imagine what a stressed out little teenager is experiencing when they've got all these uncontrollable hormones. We know two major ones during this time, especially for women, well, I guess for boys as well, is testosterone and estradiol. And those are responsible for, the maturation, sexual maturation that we experience during teenage years. And those are very, very, very highly regarded in research as reasons why, or influences on, mental health and behavior. So let's see, what else do we have? Sorry. I know I'm not supposed to take breaks or anything, but we're going to go into cognitive development. So there's a theory that I researched while doing or looking into this paper, and I was looking on PubMed and things, and there was a theory known as cognitive control. And I'm going to read what the definition of it is. It involves effective control in a number of areas, including controlling attention, reducing interfering thoughts, and being cognitively flexible. Cognitive control continues to increase in adolescence and emerging into adulthood. And so there was a lot of research that I looked into that connected a decline in cognitive control is directly connected to feelings of anxiety and depression. So those who are constantly having a sense of sadness, fear, worry, anxiousness, or whatever, research shows that they are very, 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 they perform poorly in cognitive control compared to others. So this means they have poor decision-making skills and their egos are damaged and things like that. Let's see. Another cognitive concept that I mentioned in my paper was the idea of an imaginary audience. And this involves an individual's belief that other people are very, very concerned, like super, super overly concerned with their lives than what they actually are. What does it say? It's a belief that others are as interested in them as they are with themselves, right? And individuals who are depressed or experiencing anxiety and depression have a higher regard for imaginary audience than other teenagers do. And typical teenagers have a high regard for imaginary audience. So those who are suffering from anxiety and depression have it that much more and is that much more serious. And the problem with the imaginary audience concept is not necessarily dangerous until it gets to those extreme measures, because individuals that have a high regard for imaginary audience tend to act out. They tend to engage in activities that they normally wouldn't, just to seek to fit in or to seek to be desired by others or by their peers or by their parents, or by maybe even someone that they don't even like, So anxiety and depression is tricky that way because you feel so sad about not having friends or whatever. So individuals tend to just act out and do things that aren't advisable, like drugs or participate in sexual activity and things like that, in order to kind of fill that void or quell that sadness that they may be experiencing. We're going to move on to socio-emotional aspects. So I'm just going to touch on one of them that I spoke about in the paper, wrote about in the paper, and that is, what was it? It was just like on the tip of my tongue, and I forgot. Parental and familial relationships, and that's major. And I really only should have wrote about that alone in the paper, but that's super, super, super major. I mean, the number of articles that I came across that implicated parenting styles and the lack of nurture and the lack of regard and attentiveness and care as a major, major, major influential factor in anxiety and depression, it's beyond me. So essentially it comes down to this: parents who are neglectful, parents who aren't interested and involved and attentive and caring and listening and paying attention and providing, they highly influence. And what's the word I'm looking for? You're more likely to have a child who's suffering from anxiety and depression if you are that type of parent, or if you adopt that type of parenting style, as opposed to parents who listen and who care and who ask questions and who are attentive and who are aware of their child's behavior, who provide nurture. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Parenting is a huge socio-emotional influence and factor when it comes to mental health disorders, and not just anxiety and depression in adolescents. All right, moving on. Theoretical explanation. So PJ has a theory that we discussed and talked about a lot during the course. And the formal operational stage of this theory is what directly relates to these teenage formative years of life. So in this stage, adolescents engage in extended speculation about ideal characteristics, qualities they desire in themselves and others. These thoughts often lead to adolescents to compare themselves with others in regard to these ideal standards. And their thoughts are often fantasy flights into future possibilities. And that's what the textbook quotes. And it's really just self-explanatory. Kind of goes back into the imaginary audience concept and theory. But this specific theory closely relates to why we see high levels and high instances and diagnoses of anxiety and depression in young adults. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything, which is why I am scrolling. I'm sorry for this pause. And so just to conclude, let's just conclude because I think I touched all my bases. I hope that this presentation highlighted the need and the importance for awareness in mental health in adolescents specifically. Because these are years that are stressful, they're challenging. We've been there before. I think all of my classmates are older than me or about my age, so we've all been in that position before. And during the time and while we're experiencing it and all these changes and transitioning into high school and, maybe our parents divorcing and all these other things, these are things that we don't really recognize because we're not mature enough or we don't have the perspective. So as adults and as professionals, healthcare professionals, as an EMT, as a volleyball coach and a mentor, as a future RN, I have a responsibility to become knowledgeable and to become a advocate for mental health awareness. Because if we aren't there to help the youth, then who is? They aren't able to help themselves. And honestly, adults who are experiencing anxiety and depression aren't even capable of helping themselves because they are suffering from a disease and from a disorder. So if we make ourselves more knowledgeable, we do the research that is necessary, we make ourselves better peers, better adults, better professionals, and we actually look into these things and be attentive, then we are more prepared to help combat it and prevent it and save those who end up choosing suicide as a coping mechanism. So that's why that's what motivated me to research this and write this paper. And I hope that this presentation kind of sheds some light on that and motivates you to become more attentive and kind of look into researching mental health and maybe helping someone out in your life who you may be like, I realize some of these characteristics or symptoms, because it is very important. It is an urgent public health issue and it should be taken very seriously. Thank you so much.